Now, China can very easily just bankrupt America overnight. All they've got to do is just dump the dollars and treasuries, switch to euros or any other currency. That's the end of America. They violate human rights, they jail people, they do all these ugly things. No one's denying they do a lot of what is said. But there's a very important statistic to keep in mind, which the Chinese like to bring up, which is not reported in the Western media. The U.S., that has 5% of the world's population, has 30% of the world's incarcerated population in jails. Minorities, human rights, all the global rights organizations accuse America of being the biggest violator of human rights. Chinese like to bring it up every time American politicians sit there and trying to hammer home human rights. And they go, wait a minute, what human rights? You're talking to us about Tibetans, this, that, and the other. What about blacks, Latinos, poor China, Americans? What is human rights when you're dealing with a country like China that is 1.5 billion population, officially, unofficially a lot more. That's 1/4 of the world's population. They have raised more people out of poverty in the last 5 years than the entire population of America. But when it comes to China, because they are basically America's factory, because over 60% of the factories that manufacture all the products you see here, even next door, Cost Plus, are foreign owned. They're not Chinese owned. China provides the labor and the materials. 60% of the factories that create the product that is bought in America are foreign owned. Over 50% of those factories are American owned. That's a staggering statistic. They're the ones who are saying, why are you going to create all these sanctions and, embargoes against China? Because then we have to move our factories to Vietnam or other low-cost producing countries. We don't want to make the move. That is why China owns America today. Because China, manufacturing base, is foreign owned. What did the Chinese know coming out of a communist system about all this high-tech capitalist manufacturing? Think about it. It had to come from overseas, whether it's indirectly through Taiwan or Hong Kong or directly through the U.S. Look at any major manufacturer here or supplier here. Walmart, pick a company. Next door, Cost Plus. They're all American companies that manufacture the products, and guess what? They get paid in U.S. dollars, hence China owns America today.
There's been a lot of discussion these days about the tight financial relationship between China and the United States. Well, at this rice shop in Hong Kong, I thought I'd take the opportunity to explain to you exactly what's at stake in this relationship. This jar represents the amount of debt or treasuries that the U.S. had to issue in 2006 in order to finance its budget deficit. This rice represents China's money. 1 grain is the equivalent of 5 million U.S. dollars. So in 2006, the Chinese lent the United States about this much, half. So let's talk now about 2008. The U.S. had to issue a lot more treasuries to finance its ballooning budget deficit. China bought about this much. So China bought 3 times more. It's a smaller percentage of the overall whole, but take a look at how much more debt the U.S. has. That's why the U.S. government is looking for buyers wherever they can find them, and China has a whole lot of cash. So why would China need to buy U.S. debt? Well, China has a lot of U.S. dollars from all its exports, and it needs a safe place to park those dollars and watch them grow. It's within China's interest to keep feeding the U.S. economy and help it grow so that Americans can be happy and well fed and buy more Chinese goods.
According to the Anti-Defamation League, Joe Bannister, Dave Von Kleist, who's been on the show, Jack McLam, and Ted Gunderson are now considered extremist speakers. Joe Bannister is a former top IRS agent who states that there is no law requiring Americans to pay income tax. Dave Von Kleist, of course, is a radio talk show host who produced the riveting documentary 911 in Plain Sight.
And Jack McLam is an award-winning former policeman and Vietnam vet. Ted Gunderson is a former FBI agent and Oklahoma City bombing researcher who's tired of government lies. But according to the Anti-Defamation League, opposing income taxes, spreading conspiracy theories, and distrust of the government are now on par with racism, hate crimes, and anti-Semitism.
The ADL's campaign to portray tax protesters, sovereign seekers, and 911 activists as racists dovetailed with a House Homeland Security Subcommittee hearing on terrorism and the Internet. The hearing, chaired by Democratic Representative Jane Harman, a sponsor of the Violent Radicalization and Homegrown Terrorism Prevention Act recently passed by the House, now puts anyone who questions the government or speaks out in public against policy in the same boat with Muslim jihadists.
Sources say Harman was overheard talking to an investigative target whose conversations were being legally intercepted. Congressional Quarterly and the New York Times report that Harman discussed using her influence to reduce espionage-related charges against two officials of the American-Israeli Public Affairs Committee. In return, the person with whom she was speaking would lobby then-House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi to appoint Harman chair of the House Intelligence Committee. Pelosi says there was no such lobbying.
It isn't true. No. Mrs. Harman, Congresswoman Harman, has many friends who advocate for her, and to juxtapose that on any other activities that are going on is just not correct.
In her letter to Holder, Harman says it is entirely appropriate to converse with advocacy organizations and denies contacting anyone to influence the AIPAC case. CQ also reports that after the intercept, the FBI tried to open an investigation of Harman, but Attorney General Alberto Gonzales pulled the plug because he wanted Harman's help defending the controversial domestic warrantless wiretapping program, which she supported.
Today, the former Attorney General had no comment. The Justice Department says only that it is reviewing Harman's letter. As for that deal that was allegedly discussed, Harman did not get the Intelligence Committee chairmanship, and the trial of the AIPAC officials is slated for June.
Political conservatives are fired up.
This is an effort to criminalize political dissent, standard, ordinary, everyday political dissent.
This fury a reaction to an assessment from the Department of Homeland Security saying right-wing extremist groups could exploit fears about the economic downturn, gun control, and the election of an African-American president to attract new recruits. It says groups dedicated to a single issue, such as opposition to abortion or immigration, may fall within the definition of extremist.
We are not extremists. They are the extremists.
To make its case, DHS cites a surge in purchases of guns and ammunition and the recent shooting of 3 Pittsburgh police officers by a man reportedly influenced by racist ideology and fears of gun confiscations. An organization that tracks extremist groups thinks DHS has the picture at least partially right.
The election of Obama certainly has played for these groups in the last 6, 7, 8 months. The economy, I think, is much more questionable. We really don't know if that is having an effect.
A Homeland Security official says DHS is not trying to squelch free speech. There is no link between extremists being talked about in that report and conservative political thinkers, activists, and voters. But conservatives aren't buying it.
If the Bush administration had done this to left-wing extremists, it would be all over the press as an obvious trampling on the First Amendment rights of folks and dissent.
In fact, in January, there was a warning about left-wing extremists. It was issued by the Obama administration, but both reports were begun under President Bush.
This new DHS assessment says right-wing extremists may try to radicalize disgruntled veterans to exploit their military knowledge. Some conservatives find that offensive, but DHS points to Oklahoma City bomber Timothy McVeigh, a veteran of the first Iraq War.